Okay, so today I'm going to be looking at the concept of rule by omission protocol yet again. I did an episode on this, obviously I've discussed it a lot, but basically think about the way in which you're controlled in society, and all the things that you do, right, are not necessarily things that you really want or really desire. It's part of the imbalance overcompensation concept that I talk about. So in other words, if you were in your inherent state in nature, pretend you're out in the jungle, you're living by yourself, right? None of these things are necessary. So it wouldn't operate in terms of bad or good or like all these human-made things like, oh, sin or morality. None of those things exist or matter if you're just by yourself, right? Even some of the same things you'd condemn, like, oh, if you relieve the stimuli acme yourself, that's somehow a bad thing because then you can't be controlled by it. So let's debunk the idea of like female privilege, and not debunk the idea, but like let's expose it, of female privilege and monopoly over the stimuli acme. Like, if you saw it for what it is, right, you see, okay, repression leads to obsession in society, so people are slaves to the stimuli acme in a half-mast state. To specify it, it's controlled, it's heavily censored, it's indoctrinated into you, right, to treat it that way. So because of that, largely, women benefit from that, from their looks and so forth. So what you would see here isn't necessarily that that's not something that can exist, but there wouldn't be this obsession with it. It'd be like, it is what it is, that's the human body, it's no big deal. You treat it for what it is, and then you move on. Not like, oh, let's obsess over it and base our whole life around it, and then sort of dance around it like, oh, you are subliminally benefiting from it, but, it's like you want privilege without accountability. So you would say, oh, you're benefiting from it, but you can't point that out. Otherwise, that's on you. So this is similar to the projection concept with objectivity in general. You can be aware of the artifice of a process, the nature of a process, how it's contrived and it shouldn't even exist, and all authority and structure is unqualified. You could observe that, but by observing it, it'll be projected to you like, oh, that's just you, that's just your problem, that's just like your fault for being that way, but you're just aware of that's how the process actually works. So it's needless, functionless structure to specify into some entity, right, that which would be inherent otherwise. So it's just a means of control, and then social contrivance, etc., is used to reinforce and overcompensate for it. So by that logic, you could do that with anything. Like I said, you could be in World War II Germany, and social contrivance exists to reinforce that state, right? So is it really credible? And then the other aspect is the fact that, you have that, but you also have, the very fact that it's necessary, right? If you're an objective inherent nature and it's a sound process that you're doing, even if it relates directly to your survival or whatever the case may be, you wouldn't need social contrivance for that. You wouldn't need to say, you wouldn't need anything. It would just, your actions would speak for itself. So it's only necessary to overcompensate for a subversive state, separate from the machination process or zero-sum, technology and stuff like that, which is often used to justify it. But again, if you just don't require or desire those things, then they don't have any sway in this context. So what this means also is the fact that you think about the ways that you're controlled and you take them for default, for granted. You also like it's projected, like you shoot the messenger or the observer of a process, right, that you would show awareness, or you would, be aware of the nature of the process, so not insist upon it. Ergo, what that means is that process perhaps should not exist, or is not a sound basis by which all people universally can be controlled, or, right, there is no basis to say that, because you have to assume their intent of exactly what they want. You have to force it on them through unqualified empirical authority. All authority is unqualified, right? There is no basis for authority. That's just a basic objective reality, right? You can pretend like, oh, it's some veiled meritocracy, which even that's inconsistent. But this is the problem with the form, is you have to defer to authority. It's not real, right? Power, on the other hand, is a different thing. Like, okay, somebody, and that's what it's based on anyway, but somebody has weapons, their force is greater than yours, but they can try to force, even then, they can't really force you, they could kill you, but they could force you to do something. But there's no actual basis for the authority other than that you defer to it. So you're always in control of that, whether you realize it or not. There's a public mass of people don't realize it, they just mindlessly go along with it. And they're indoctrinated so heavily that they can't see their own cognitive dissonance with it. So they almost take pride in any gratification, like how well can I be indoctrinated into this state? There is actually no basis to it, though. And the problem with that is that seems like a claim, but it's actually objective reality versus the contrivance response. And if you doubt that, then every society throughout human history, you would question most of them, or maybe all of them, and say, oh, how could they have let this guy be the leader, or let them get away with these atrocities, or support all of this? So you would question it, and you would point out the bad credibility, right, the lacking credibility, but you wouldn't see that in your own. So it's the same process. So even if you say, well, but it's not as bad today, or, you know, that's not the point, right? You can overcompensate for it, but it's the same process by which, again, World War II Germany or China right now, it's the same process. So even if you say, oh, but our leaders are better, or our specifics are better, our technology is better, right? It's still, how you got there is not sound, because none of that authority is actually qualified, so it should be held constantly accountable at the very least, which is not. And then the other thing is, on that same topic, you know, like being aware of the nature of a process is somehow a bad thing. So it's like a defense mechanism to not be aware of it. Like, oh, just don't think about it and then it's okay. Like, that shouldn't be necessary to do. And the fact that it's necessary would be disqualifying. So let me put it this way. You know, it'll be posed as an absolute. This is how contrivance works, and what I call the conflict of contrivance. So society, or your life, your way of life, right, which people would insist upon this because they're obviously already indoctrinated into it, even though they didn't choose it. So you're indoctrinated into it before you're old enough to think for yourself, and then you can't acknowledge the cognitive dissonance of the state that you're in, right? You couldn't say that, oh, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe not even wrong, but like, you don't have a standard, you're only doing it because you were pressured to do it, made to do it, you know, indoctrinated into it when you're younger before you can critically think for yourself. So what it means is you don't want to acknowledge that. So it's a great way to control people. You put them into a position, right? It's like I force everybody somehow, like, okay, I'm gonna somehow, somebody nuclear bombs every place on the planet except for Antarctica, and now everybody's living in Antarctica. But then I use that to validate and say, see, everybody loves Antarctica. Antarctica is a great place. That's the best place on Earth, right? Even though I nuclear bombed everywhere else and forced them to do that. But I can take credit. No, I always told you Antarctica was the best. It's the most wonderful place to live. So you're creating it, and there's that insecurity of outward insistence by contrivance that's necessary to maintain its kind of seemingly, you know, its authoritative state, because there is no actual basis to it. So you see this a lot with parents, but you also see it with government. Like, there really is no basis for their authority. There's nothing. But they'll exploit reliance, like, we're going to starve you out if you don't do what we say, or, you know, you rely on us even though we make you rely on us because we, you know, oh, you're not allowed to leave the house and go hunt or fish for yourself or fend for yourself out in nature. You're not allowed to do that. And then on the flip side, oh, see how you rely on us, see how you need us to feel like, no, you're controlling everything and then saying you need that. And the form of doing that is also deference. You're saying, I'm deferring to other people and saying, okay, I won't go in nature and I won't do that, even though there's no real good reason for that. You wouldn't be hurting anybody. But on a collective mass scale, you have to be controlled like a slave and an animal. But, like, you're deferring to corporations who own that land, like as if that's really a valid thing to do, or governments or whatever it is. You're deferring to something. So you're deferring. It's not that, oh, you need them. It's that they need you to be a nice, mindless sheep disciple. And then, so what it comes down to is the fact that comes down to the fact that you're basically putting yourself in a position, right, that's empirically forced there. So it'll be like, okay, you're born, you didn't choose to be born even, right? It's not about whether it's positive or negative or anything like that, but like, so you don't choose to be born, right? So your parents choose to have you, or whatever, they have you, however they manage it. But then, so you didn't choose that. Then when you're too young to think for yourself, like, oh, you rely on them, but that would apply to 100% of people. So that would validate everybody then. So every parent is always validated because every child always relied on them when they were young, because you can't fend for yourself when you're young. So is that really a credible basis? Because that would apply to 100% of people, right? So that doesn't validate anything, and you shouldn't have kids unless you know, or if you're gonna hold that over somebody's head, like, then you're just not ready for it, because you're saying, we're gonna hold over your head something that you have zero control over, that we created the situation in the first place. Then you're indoctrinated heavily, trained like an animal throughout your youth. And then when you're finally old enough to think for yourself, everything is framed in false duality, like defiance or rebellion to this false absolute. So the way that contrivance works is in reverse, right? It's not inherent, it's not absolute, it's not the sound process, exclusive to all others, at least, right? Like, so it's not about specifically saying, oh, you should do this instead, or this should be. It's about the specific contrivance state that you're in right now has no actual basis for it, and your life would reflect that. The reason why you're doing it is this mindless reaction. You were indoctrinated into it. You love your country because you happen to live there. You value this because you happen to be born there. Everything is just reactionary. If you were born in North Korea, you would support that. If you're born, you're mindless. You're just mindless. So there's no actual standard where you sit back and think and hold it accountable, because you're so dug in already. And that's where, like, possessions or anything, family and stuff, relations, they tend to enslave you, because you think you're defending that, but in the name of that, you're actually in service of the contrivance state, right? The middleman always wins that I talk about. The middle class is the real enemy, because they're kind of, in their selfishness for this, zero-sum rat race, they reinforce the larger process that actually controls them too, that they would complain about, but they don't realize it. Like, you buy phones from a big company, or you buy whatever from big companies, and then those same big companies rule the world. So, like, you're creating your own oppressors, and then you have, you have this other thing that, like, the devil in the modern day comes with little things to bribe you, and with conveniences and stuff like that. But it's a situation where situation where you're basically in a position to again, contrivance trying to qualify in reverse, right? Like, see how much you owe back to contrivance, but the same contrivance state that would restrict you from doing anything freely in nature, in general, in life, that takes a monopoly over means and nature itself and resources, everything. It restricts everything you do, and you defer to it constantly. So it's a trade-off at most. Like, it's not never, society and even technology is not a net positive. It's always a trade-off. You're trading off the freedom to do so many things, which reduces you to this half-assed state that I talk about. You're reducing the freedom to do so many things just so that you can get that sort of benefit in return. So it's a concession. It's not really a net positive, but somehow people are brainwashed to think that way. Like, again, the bread and circuses crowd of just, oh, how can we complain? We have better technology. You could have it worse, kind of a thing. That has nothing to do with it, because, okay, so World War II Germany had better technology than World War I Germany, so everything's fine there. Or, China right now has better technology than the past. That has nothing to do with it. It's trying to use that again in a way to qualify itself, which is otherwise invalid. So, especially, again, exclusionary to everything else. So this is the objective basis. If there is no basis to what your lifestyle is, the mass collective thing, it means that you basically, the way to explain it is just that, again, you're indoctrinated before you can critically think for yourself. then anything you do is like, oh, you're being rebellious. But rebellious against what? You're putting an animal in a cage, effectively, despite all the overcompensations. You're putting an animal in a cage, and then you're saying it's rebelling, like assuming that you have the right to do that, and so it's that first step, right? It's that unqualified first step. You're doing something outward, but you take that as default and for granted, and then everything that someone does in reaction, they're defined by that. So they're defined by their reaction to contrivance. So, oh, look at this rebellious animal trying to break out and trying to destroy things. Never mind the fact that you took that animal and put it in a cage. Never mind that you just get to do without any accountability. So that would explain it. So you're creating that issue, right? And the same thing is true in society, but the best way to look at it is like be aware of the nature of a process. So for example, you might think you desire something. This is getting back to the point that I started with, like the imbalance overcompensation. You desire folly favoritism, you desire escapism, you desire entertainment, you desire all this, right? But you don't really desire it. It's a reaction on two levels. One, you have to distract yourself from the cognitive dissonance of a contrivance state, how it is unsound, but you're still forced and subject to it anyway, right? So you have to distract yourself, which is not credible because you shouldn't need to do that, right? You have to dumb yourself down and distract yourself, which shows a lack of credibility and lack of peace with your state, because you might think, oh, that's a normal, natural thing, but it's only necessary in a subversive state. If you have true value, like an absolutist tendency, there would be no need to do that because your life would be sound and consistent, even if in a minimalistic sense, right? But it would be consistent. There wouldn't be a need to appeal to artifice that way to control you and distract you, right? So that could be one reason. The other reason is it's the only thing that's left free. Everything of significance and impact, like nature itself, everything is monopolized, all the resources on the planet, everything is monopolized. So the only thing you're free to do would be something like folly favoritism. Everything else is restricted. And then right, so you're doing it might seem to be like, oh, but you desire that, or that's part of like the reason for what you do, but there is no reason for anything you do. It's all a reaction, like, oh, for good food, right? Like, what is the meaning of life? Let's look at it. First of all, the only reason why you ask for a meaning is because it's more to justify the inhibited half-mad state that you're reduced to by an unqualified empirical authority contrivance state. But despite that mouthful, so you only seek meaning because of that instead of being inherent nature, peace with yourself, and free to what extent you naturally are. But, again, it's the inverse, the false inherent contrivance response. And so you take it for granted as default, but that still would justify it in specific basis, because it's a non-accountable basis. People just treat it as default and then just whatever overcompensate for its lackings. But the fact that you have to do that, so it would be posed as an absolute, right? Like society or contrivance. But then either it's a functional pretense, like, oh, it's for the sake of blank, it's for the sake of human good. But what about amalgam theory? That would invalidate inconsistency. You'd be constantly holding it accountable, and even then it's not absolute, but it's kind of, how can we best achieve this standard? And if you're achieving it lesser, then it's invalid. If you're achieving it better, then you replace it. Like, you'd never be at peace with it, just mindlessly accepting as default. And then the other aspect of that is the simple fact that if it is absolute, then you wouldn't see the conflict of contrivance come out of it. So it'd be, okay, it's absolute, so you would be at peace with the state. There wouldn't be so much conflict, there wouldn't be so much inconsistency, there wouldn't be, right, all of these issues with it. So when you see those things come out, then it becomes, oh, it's a matter of distracting yourself or overcompensating for the flawed process. Not that the process is flawed and therefore, again, not even invalid specifically, like, oh, don't do that one thing, do something else instead. But it would be exclusionary, like, but again, that's how you control a mass of people. They just uncritically accept the same uniform thing, which that's the issue, right? It's not saying what you should do instead or anything, but it's a simple fact that, again, it's not qualified in the first word. So getting back to the imbalance overcompensation part of it is the fact that you don't want to acknowledge the cognitive dissonance of your state, so everything becomes like it's almost burden shifting, that you're saying it's your fault for not tolerating contrivance, even though that would apply to any contrivance state ever. So it's your fault for not tolerating the bread and circuses days of Rome, and you're crazy for questioning it, and everybody else mindlessly goes along with it. It's your fault for not tolerating North Korea, or, you know, it could be government, but it's mainly society that I'm talking about. But it was your fault, and you use that in service of some overextended, unqualified empirical authority as well. But, you know, so it's like being positive is actually negative, because then you reinforce and overcompensate something that otherwise would be flawed. Why not just be objective, realistic, and then you would see the problems that exist. So this is like the overextension problem, and why the stimulating without any thought. So what it means is, right, that's like you're reacting to a state that already exists, that you didn't choose and that you didn't create, but now you're subject to it, right? So that's the ultimate basis of unqualified control. You didn't choose for there to be 8 billion people. You didn't create 8 billion people. You might not even have kids at all your whole life, right? So again, not preserving the stimuli acme. So what does that mean? But you're still inhibited on it, on basis of it, right? So something that's already established is used as the basis to control you, even though that has nothing to do with you. And if you mindlessly keep doing that, so again, the mindless actions of others are used against you, and they have to overcompensate and cope with their own cognitive dissonance within that state. So it's kind of ironic. You always know that they're outwardly insisting and insecure, because you know that right, they're not at peace with their own state, so they have to outwardly insist and project and censor reality. And there's a deeper meaning to that projection too. It's not just that, you know, like for example, you're a member of contrivance, you have to see everything in the world in terms of false duality, right? So suppose somebody's, again, just whatever, some extreme example, somebody's a trillionaire and you don't know it or whatever, and so they're doing things not for any gain, they're just doing them because they're bored, or because whatever, they have some measure, they have some higher other kind of thing that they're about. But you would project it, like everything has to be zero-sum means, everything has to be stimuli acme, right? You project it even if it's not true. So truth doesn't matter to half-mass human functions seeking to reinforce their own contrivance state that they're not at peace with, right? They're not at peace themselves, so they have to censor reality itself, and they can only see things in terms of that, what would reinforce their own contrivance state. So all they care about are those things, right? Or that's what they're trained to do. So if something unconditional or neutral comes along, right, that isn't about that, and rejects the ego basis by which they're controlled, and would be like self-governing and free, now all of a sudden, you know, the irony would be specified, like, oh, so we're not going to respect your authority because you kind of don't do the overcompensative things necessary to reinforce overcompensate. But you're doing that to represent all things like that, but it's selective awareness. So it comes down to contest of contrivance. Who can best overcompensate for this unqualified empirical authority, et cetera, half-mass functional basis, specifying something that's inherent. Whereas he would remove the need, non-required, non-desire concept that I talk about. Basically, for example, oh, if everybody was like me, the minimalist, not exactly like me, but like this person, you would starve out contrivance. You would, you know, fend for yourself, and that would be the end of contrivance. So it's a weakness, it's a convenience, it's a laziness, it's a gratification that people are slaves to. And you might think, oh, well, that's what people want, but the way, even if that's what one person wanted, right, you don't require much. So it'll be like, oh, you lack the capability to do all these things in society or something, right? But maybe you don't want anything of that scale. You don't need, you're minimalist, you're, you know, non-required, non-desire. So it's not an ego thing anymore. It's like, oh, you don't require those things that people are otherwise materialistic and possessive about. So how can we do that? How can we be defined that way? Like, the reason why you should be controlled by society and contrivance is because you failed to achieve what it wants you to achieve. But the problem is, with that, survive. Like, then it's hard to control them because there's no ego gratification from overcompensating for that very same self-created conflict of contrivance. or that's the only reason why you want it in the first place. It's like, oh, you go to a bar and you get drunk and all this. You might think you want that inherently, but the only reason why you really want that is because your life isn't at peace. You're in an imbalanced state where you're heavily restricted one way, inhibited one way, like at work, at school, and whatever, and now you want to overcompensate and go to the opposite extreme. If your life was at peace and balance, you might not find any special meaning in that, right? It wouldn't be, or it'd be like I say with holidays and traditions and stuff. Why couldn't any day be a holiday, or make your own holiday instead of, oh, you're a slave? Even freedom from contrivance is only given. You still need permission by contrivance to have a temporary respite from contrivance. But the other point of it is the fact that you're putting yourself in a position to again have the imbalance over compensation. So like appearances are a good example. Oh, you go through all a certain amount of things to keep up appearances, and then you have to censor reality itself. Like, it's like when something's controversial or offensive, it's like, yes, it would be offensive to your unqualified contrivance state that might make you realize reality and not be a part of your contrivance state anymore. Like, you have to censor the very natural human body to be able to live in the fantasy, artificial, controlled state that you're in, right? Otherwise, what you're basically saying is that people, they can't control themselves, or they're not at peace with themselves, or, you have to herd them like sheep, like animals, but you have to censor reality itself to maintain an artificial state. Which shows you, of course, that it's unqualified, empirical basis. So the other part of this is the fact that, again, speaking of imbalance over compensation, like, you create the conflict yourself. So you can say, oh, the parent has children, but then they use that to validate something, or society indoctrinates you so heavily, and then you don't want to face the cognitive dissonance of that, so you indignantly insist upon your reactionary state, or you take pride in expression in insignificant ways like your appearance, but again, it's like it's only necessary because of contrivance, and then it's used to somehow validate contrivance. Like, you could be at peace just walking around, like, let me think about how to explain it. So the minimalist might walk around naked. They're at peace, they don't require anything. Or the absolutist might, wear things for functional reasons only, or the most extravagant thing ever, but it's like, those things don't really matter, and so it's just subjective, and they only matter as much as you acknowledge them to matter, so they really don't, right? You could be free of all that if everybody was just aware of that fact. It only, again, this is the initial mind where you kind of extract value from externality and reduce everything to the physical state. Whatever somebody's wearing has zero impact on anything. It's not real, it doesn't matter, it's just, but you'll insist upon it and let that be a defining factor, instead of, oh, you're aware of the nature of the process, it's just artificial, they're just doing that to present themselves a certain way, it really doesn't matter. But because you're in that half-mass subversive state, that is not a true value, inherent, natural state, you're letting that be the defining factor, the appearance of something. They can easily be curated, contrived, manipulated, but you kind of take a process at face value that is carefully prepared. Or, in fact, the other point with this is that, but the point being that the half-mass state wouldn't happen, where you kind of value it, but you don't value it all the way, and so you're kind of caught in this endless trap of, oh, it's a false absolute, but then it has the conflict of contrivance and inconsistency, and then you also have one other point, which is the fact that like, contrivance will inhibit everything and restrict everything, and victims of contrivance sort of take pride in that. Like, oh, look how I overcame this unqualified thing, so I'm going to be proud of it and enforce it too. But then you realize there is no basis of it because it's half-mass zero-sum means. So either you don't require or desire them, So there's never any measure. It's all, people will treat life as zero-sum in effect, but they'll pretend, place undue emphasis and value on certain things to be controlled by them, or to have them be controlled, like specifying the stimuli acme. So when you think about that, it's actually quite the opposite interpretation that would probably disturb you, is that, oh, like love, it's meant to be all these kind of lofty things. Not only is it not true, but it's only a tool to control you, because if you didn't pretend it was absolute, now you wouldn't be restricted to one person, and you would be free, and you wouldn't you wouldn't be free. Or again, here's the fallacy of attribution, like everything has to be attributed. So like if somebody does something, they'll attribute it to like, oh, that's like something from fiction, or like they can't just see the inherent free variable nature of people, right? They'll say like, oh, life imitates art, not that art, whatever, it's the same basis that we created is based on what we could possibly do, that we're often inhibited and not free to do normally. But the other thing is the fact that everything is done in a reactionary way, right? There's a false absolute to value it. There's also the fact that, again, there's no measure. It's, in practice, it's zero-sum. So a false absolute is supposed to control you, because otherwise it would just be an inherent process that would be free. So again, not only is it not absolute, but it's pretended to be, so that it bypasses your critical thinking. So it is absolute, but then you don't hold it accountable, and you don't, actually think about it in ways that would reveal the conflict and contrivance of pretending something that's real that isn't, or absolute that isn't. And then let me think. So those are some of the ways that people are controlled, and one of the other ways is the fact that basically you are, again, everything's on rails, you're inhibited constantly, unqualified, empirical authority, leading to a specific uniform outcome that's benevolent and forced upon you, and there's no human variable, it's all just uniform. So, okay, here's a good example, like, you could show this as like a scene from a movie or something, right? Again, attributing it to fiction, because we can't look at things in reality. Like, for example, me saying this right now, some of the same logical razors and different things, you wouldn't take that seriously. You wouldn't quote that, but you would if, oh, Yoda says it, or some, fictional. But that kind of shows you. People have that cognitive dissonance buffer that they can't even take reality seriously. Because if they took reality seriously, then they would feel compelled to do something about it. Whereas, oh, it's fiction, so there's no burden of consequence. But that's how brain dead people are. That the same thing that they would value in fiction, they wouldn't value in real life. So, is it valuable or isn't it? But it's only valuable if you suspend your thought and don't feel compelled to do anything. And then, you have... It's the fact that, again, okay, let's look at this as far as like the inability to achieve a false absolute, not that it's not absolute, or to practice. So this is how contrivance works in a microcosm sense. Let's look at it with this modern technology, right? because technology really is what defines everything, but then we have the social contrivance buffer to try to separate it. Like, either go back to an inherent free state without contrivance, or don't pretend like there's anything to it, because even human beings are reduced to human functions in that capacity. It's like, oh, if you truly value a person, you wouldn't value their half-assed state that they're reduced to by, you know, being a human function, like somebody who's whatever, in any job type position. They're just doing it like that. They're just doing it mindlessly. So false absolute default. But so like you go into a store, and then you, right, like let's make it more simple too. Like you go into a gas station now, and then you pick up a few things that you're gonna buy. Never mind the fact that the act of buying those is, again, reinforcing a big corporation that you might question. But again, you're a mindless sheep, so you don't think about things that deeply. You would have an issue if you thought about it, so just don't think about it. That's actually how society works, right? So make it more subtle. Again, that's what rule by omission basically is. You do have an issue with what you're doing. You wouldn't have any basis for your life, but you don't think about it, so therefore that's good. Or you constantly overcompensate and try to reinforce an unsound state. So you'll indignantly insist upon it, take pride in it, but it's still, you know, unqualified and not universally specified. And then the other thing is the fact that, so like zero-sum means would be a concession. Like, well, you know, that would be the cause or something, but it doesn't make sense, because again, what if you are more at peace in nature as a minimalist, something like that? It wouldn't be about that, right? It's not about whatever you have, or I don't know, but again, okay, you walk into a gas station, you pick up a few items, and then you go up to the counter, and now the counters are all like self-checkout. So then there's a person standing behind there, and so you just stand there for a second. Like this is a scene from a movie that I should make myself. Like it should be a scene. So this is the modern machination process. Like, so you go up there, and then you just stand there, and you wait for the cashier to come and do it, right, in the area of the counter that is like, whatever, the old counter. That how they normally ring it up, and then the person asks you, oh, like, do you need help with something, as if to imply like, oh, you don't know how that self-checkout thing works, not that you're choosing not to use it or disacknowledging it, right? So you're caught between this inverse of like, it's somehow your fault for failing to acquiesce to this new machination process form of controlling you. Oh, you just lack the ability, you just don't get it, and take some fallacy gratification pride in being a well-trained animal, like, oh, look, I could use that better than you, I'm better at self-checking out than you, like, whatever. But it's like, oh, you must be dumb that you don't get how to use it. But that framing is interesting, because what it means is that so it's always your inability to acquiesce to something, right, to a process. Not that any process can ever be flawed. So it could be World War II Germany, it could be anything, right? In the modern day, it's just machination technology process. So what that means is, it's your inability to acquiesce to this, like it really is how you look at society overall. You've lived out in the jungle your whole life. So now it's like, oh, you must be dumb, or you're somehow, it's your fault for failing to adapt to society or know how all these artificial things work. But they're artificial, they're just random, they're arbitrary, they're not, you know, so you can argue some basic zero-sum functional basis, but even that is more collective overextension. Like, it's not the most efficient thing, it's just something that's done to control the mass number of people. Like, so everything mass-produced suffers inequality for it. So, oh, it's your inability to practice the subversive lesser process that exists only to control a large number of people, that if it was done on an individual basis, it would be much higher quality or much other, you know, better value. So again, think about that framing. It's your inability to acquiesce to this new specific contrivance machination process. Right, and then sooner or later that'll change, and then now you got to acquiesce to the new thing. So it's incumbent upon you as the ordinary person to acquiesce to that, not the fault of the process, that it might be flawed or unqualified or unsound, or that it can never be that's bad. Like, oh, maybe these corporations shouldn't be doing that, where they're making everything self-checkout, but you're just a mindless sheep and you'll go along with it. But not only will you go along with it, it's basically the fact that everything is half-mass, you don't including yourself, and then you have a lot of ego framing is present here too. But getting back to the core point of this is the fact that you're basically in a position to how can I explain it? Like, you're in a position to take something as absolute even if it's not, or like your inability to acquiesce. So it's your fault that you can't acquiesce to the specific modern current machination process of self-checkout. Not that you reject the idea of it, not that you have some inhibition about it, not that it could be a bad process, flawed process, not that it's still artificial and it's either a pain or a nuisance or negative that I even have to do it. Instead, it's framed as, oh, it's your inability to do this thing. But that thing is only necessary because, again, of collective overextension, control, etc. Or, again, oh, the company doing it for the bottom line or something. So it's like, you're not... it's a good way, again, this is how contrivance works as a whole, where it's your fault for not acquiescing to contrivance, never the fault of contrivance itself. So again, okay, let's make every counter self-checkout, and then if there's any issue with that, oh, it's your fault, you're just using it wrong, user error. But never mind the fact that that shouldn't be the case necessarily.